Welcome to From an Educator. In this episode, we talk about the Dark Ages. And no, this is not a history lesson. You'll see what I mean. Let's get to it. Welcome back to From an Educator. I'm Mr. James, an educator, and this is show number 63. It's currently June 19th. We are 1.5 days away from the summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year. I believe it begins Sunday at 11:41 p.m., I believe. Look that up. But that is a lot of mathematical calculations that I don't keep up with. But yes, and yet today I'm talking about the Dark Ages. And as I mentioned before, not a history lesson, but I will go over a little bit about the history of that. Now I've kind of termed this time post-school, early summer vacation for teachers, yet, out of the pandemic, transitioning to a different schedule. I consider that a dark ages of sorts. And I'll explain more as we get there. So updates in my Maine life. What's going on with me? Wow. I think right now I am posed to have a storm here in Maine where I'm living. It's sunny, as you can see, but it's windy, and it goes from sunny, really sunny, to dark, to really sunny, and it may be changing, fluctuating as you see the light. But I have another light on here so I can balance things out. For those watching, lighting is a very important thing, right? So scheduling woes, first of all. Yeah, wow. Having to enter in all of the engagements and obligations that I took prior to school ending into my calendar. I finally entered most of them in. I think most of them. I think I have all of them. I'm hoping. I guess my biggest woes is just trying to get ready for things that are not my normal schedule. And that's kind of why I decided to call this episode The Dark Ages. So we're going to get into that a little bit more, but needless to say, it has to do with having a changed schedule and not having that structure anymore that you kind of can fall back on. It's a funny thing that when you never get a chance to relax, but you relax when you have a firm schedule. You find little tiny areas of rest in between doing projects and whatever else you have to do during your working day. And it's more restful to find those than it is to have a lot of time open and not have anything scheduled. And you kind of blur those lines a little bit. So we'll go into detail more about that in a little while. Another update, I have a college class that is beginning, another one. It's going to expand my horizons with something else I haven't looked into before. At the same time, when things begin, it's always that, sense of somewhat of an anxiety when you look at what the schedule is going to be for the entire class. So you get the syllabus and you go, oh, okay, oh, I didn't expect that. Oh, okay, all right. So there's a few conflicting times that I have to be present in the class and be synchronous and not asynchronous. And it's going to, change a few things around, and that's just going to be an email I have to send and some coverage I need to get. But it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's just when those things overlap, because it's only so many hours in the day, and everyone makes their schedule devoid of what your life is doing. So just think about that way. And a summer program. So I have another week off. We think off is something I do, which is not what I do. And then I have a summer program that I will be teaching in. This time I'm in a different role, completely different. So we'll see how that pans out. But of course, I will be monologuing it, or possibly in a few days meeting up with the trusted sidekick or co-founder, who as he probably wants to be called, of this podcast, Mr. Ritchie. And yeah, I will talk about how that is going when I'm in the midst of it. Um, the last little thing on my update is, yes, preparation for gigs. As a musician, I play in restaurants and whatever venues I can get during the summer. And I have two bands that I play with regularly, but I also do a lot of theater shows as well as any side things that I might be needed for. So I wanted to talk about the end of an era. And this is gonna be our introduction into the main theme this week. So this talk of returning to normal, right? We've talked about this for how long in this podcast? Over a year. Ever since we talked about the pandemic, we talked about returning to normal. When this is done with, we're going to return to normal. And we know now, and I've known it, that you just don't return to the way things were. You're always changing. And honestly, during this time, businesses have failed. People have gone out of business. People have had changes in their life. They've made life choices that have just veered them off into a different direction. And there's not going to be any returning to the way things were. I think the way things were, we were all a little bit naive, and we didn't really know, what we might have been following certain paths that were working well for us, but the way this thing has changed everything, we had to figure out how to survive. And maybe now we're thinking, how does survival fit in with my goals that I've had, right? How does that fit in? Did everything in my life have to stop because of the pandemic? And now I'm trying to get everything back. And is it really viable again? So the question is, how do we return to the past? How do we get back to the way things were? My answer, we don't return to the past. You know where you've been, and you've just got to head forward. And you can maybe gather some of the things you've done in the past. Maybe you can still be in the same career. You can still follow a similar schedule, but something is going to give. Something's going to change in your life. And I'm sure things have already changed. Maybe the business that you went to prior to the pandemic is no longer open. Maybe you have a different schedule for getting food, groceries, for shopping, for seeing people. Maybe you have different precautions to take into consideration. You have to change how you do things, and that's just the fact of life. I mean, this pandemic is not done, and it might just be ramping up. And we have summer solstice coming, the longest day of the year, and then the days are going to start to get shorter. And then we're going to head into the fall. And with the fall, we have the cold and flu season. And we already know what it's been like to have this horrible virus. And now we're going to have to possibly experience this every single cold and flu season, at least, for the foreseeable future. And it's just, are we going to return to the way things were prior to all of this? I don't think that's going to happen. And this isn't the first little pandemic or epidemic or whatever we've faced. So a lot of people are talking about what the next one is going to be worse, and this and that. And I don't want to paint a negative light on things, because I seem to be somewhat of a pessimist sometimes on this podcast, but I'm going to change that, right? I'm going to change that. I try to do it with an optimistic smile. Let me just think about that way. And can you hear me smiling? Yeah, okay. Just making sure. So should we return to the past? I'm guessing not. But the questions are, and you should probably think about this in your life, what has ended for you? What has ended in your life that meant something to you or that you've changed? And you got to think, are you for the better? What has made you change? And coming out of this whole thing, what can you do that's different and yet still get the fulfillment you might have had before? So, case in point, I am looking at my career as a freelance musician differently. During the pandemic, I have practiced different styles of music and I've gone through different phases. I had the classical music phase, I had the jazz phase, I had the heavy metal rock phase. I'm kind of blending in a couple different things for these bands right now and learning music, but I just had to dip my toe into these different genres, these different styles that I've played over the years, and just kind of go in and be like, okay, I really want to get more into this sort of thing, and maybe something's going to click, and maybe I want to stick with something for a little bit longer rather than just be the jack of all styles, if that makes any sense. But I've kind of changed how I thought about everything. Of course, I want to make things more efficient for myself. I want to travel with less equipment. I want to, do less work to get to a place, to set up, and then be more in the moment. Should always be more in the moment. And I'm looking at ways to do that. I'm getting better at, my workout routines. I'm getting better at my diet, how I eat, when I eat. That's something I think everybody is probably doing all the time. You try something, you don't like it, or you don't feel good, you don't try that again. You move to something else. And now that I'm about to begin a very stressful schedule, I am trying to figure out how I can fit all of my previous things in. And that's kind of like, it's going to be tough because if you have a job during the day that you build your life schedule around and then that job, you know, goes away, you have this empty space that you want to fill. And you want to fill it the same way that a job filled it. So you want to have that same satisfaction you're getting things done, accomplished. You want to, get the same sort of like routine that you've had, that you followed. Maybe it's the same way times that you eat. Maybe it's just the moving around. I mean, going from 20,000 steps to around 10,000 steps a day is quite a change. Maybe sitting more is a change, or being able to not focus on impending, deadlines for things is a change. And yet I'm imposing deadlines and all these stressful schedules on myself all the time, and I continue to do so. But it's just not fitting the same mold that I've made, as my job has. So my last point is our naivete, or naivety, however you want to pronounce that, has ended. We can no longer go about our lives not focusing on survival, if we want to take an education standpoint about this, because we never know what's going to be around the corner. Of course, we always will have time to get better, and we're going to get better basically at living if we have you know our sights up for anything that might come down the pike. Uh, we don't want it to turn into the way it was, where everything was sold out and no one could get toilet paper, right? Remember that time? Or food shortage. That the price of gas is going up as well, and hearing about all these different things that have changed because of the pandemic and things shutting down. And so I guess it's time to get better. What is it? Losing things in your life doesn't mean you're going to be you're going to get worse, you're going to get more efficient, and you're going to get better at adapting. Getting better has nothing to do with all the material and stuff that you accumulate. It has to do with using what you have the best way that you can. So today's main theme, the Dark Ages. So if you're looking at the screen right now, you might see, looks like the inside of a church, probably a medieval church. The Middle Ages, the Dark Ages in history, and this is my tiny little bit of history, will be brief, I promise. So this is the point after the Roman Empire fell. And that, of course, took many years and everything. But just so imagine, so we can understand what happened, imagine a group, I guess we'll call it a group, a civilization that went out and fought to control more plots of land, more cultures, and assimilated things together and tried to make a giant sort of civilization out of all peoples. And that was basically the Roman Empire. And they stretched out, and some say they wanted too much, and that's why they just could not close in ranks and basically control everything, because they had people far out that could not get supplies, and they couldn't get more military people to basically help them out when they were fighting wars with other peoples that they wanted to take over and, you know, use their resources and make them assimilate, which seems like a horrible thing, right? Where this is part of the thing for history, is that wars, you know, are not good. And when things are fought, there's going to be somebody who wins and someone who loses, but the winner is not always a winner and the loser is not always a loser. And yeah, things get sort of messy in there. But this empire could not hold up because it couldn't have a central ruler that would have rules or whatever that could travel this distance. Currently, I'm in Maine. If someone made a law in California for Mainers to follow, how would we do that? That California is 3,000 miles to the west of us. It's completely out there. And we wouldn't follow their whatever rule they did because they couldn't enforce it. The Roman Empire couldn't enforce its structure on everybody. But it gave a structure, and it did assimilate many ideas. So a lot of the things that we enjoy in our households nowadays, we owe to, you know, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the ancient peoples that the Roman Empire sought to claim, I guess, as their own. So after this happened, after this sort of empire crumbled and there was no longer this central rule and everyone seemed to go about and do their own thing somewhat, they called this the Middle Ages, and some refer to it as the Dark Ages. Now, the Dark Ages doesn't mean there were lots of wars and fighting and, you know, gangs and groups and whatever. It basically meant that there was no real like running record. So it was dark. When we have a record of things happening, it gives us light on what happened. So we have like a historical record of all these things. The Dark Ages, for the most part, we didn't have a very clear picture of what was happening everywhere. Now, for me, this is a dark age that we are currently in. And it doesn't mean dark as far as, you know, light is nice, dark is bad. It means dark as far as we have lost a structure. Now, as a teacher, my personal dark age is my school year has ended, and I don't have the structure that I'm accustomed to of waking up early, which I still do, but going to a place of employment afterwards and moving around a lot and preparing for things and talking in front of students and getting feedback and just working on all of these things that teaching, encompasses. That's done. That structure is done right now. And it's going to have to get, you know, ramped up this coming week because I'm starting a summer program, which is going to be somewhat like that. But at the same time, I've been without this structure now for a week and a half, and I feel it's a dark age. I feel it's my untethered self trying to find something to fill the time. Now I do mention I have a lot of different things to fill this time, but it's just not the same. And some would say our pandemic was a dark age that we've all gone through, and that the pandemic is weaning, and now that we're basically going to be out of this dark age. But I would say that during the pandemic, for the most part, many people were surviving. We were learning different ways to do things. And now that we don't have that structure that we had to create during this pandemic of cleaning, of just hygiene to like the 10th degree, now that we don't have that, we have to be kind of free in this sort of dark, unsure path in front of us. And that's our current dark age. We are going through a dark age currently. And it's basically us having to clean up and figure out if what we did prior to the pandemic, if it's going to be normal, if it's going to be the way things were. Personally, for me, it's dealing with not having a schedule at school and returning to a school that's going to be completely different. It is going to be different because the way I will be doing things will be different, as well as every other teacher I know. We don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know if this virus is going to come back in a different way. When it rains, it pours. And I had this sort of title, little segment of this slide talking about when it gets bad, things tend to get really bad. And I'm trying to prep myself for what's going to be happening in the fall, but also figure out how to use this time that I have now wisely. Whereas before, with my schedule, I was just always looking for any spare time I had to fit more activities in. And now that I have some of the time, I need to force myself to get some of these activities accomplished. And I think it's a dark age because I'm not producing as much that I could if I was working. Kind of the workaholics lament, I guess, when you're not working. There's also this anxiety over an oncoming renaissance. So, Roman Empire falls historically, Dark Ages, Middle Ages, Renaissance. What do we hear from the Renaissance? We hear everyone rejoicing in the intellect of humans, painters, music. Everything just seems to come alive as everything comes together, or at least townships appear and they're thriving and cultures thrive. And that's something I know that is going to happen, and it's going to happen for everybody, hopefully, no matter what job you do. But when's it going to happen, and how is it going to happen? So this is anxiety of this oncoming renaissance, where will I know when it's happening? How am I going to experience this and really be present And is it going to be as good as maybe it once was? If I ever thought that I was at the top of my game, am I going to be there again? I'm worried about that even with the gigs I'm doing. But thinking in terms of school, theaters, which haven't opened yet, I want to see a play again. I want to be part of a play again. That'd be great. But any indoor activities, there's some anxiety I have about how are things going to be different this time around. I keep making this sort of like reaction in my face because I've gotten used to that. Like that. I'm sort of reserved about everything. But that's my dark ages. The dark ages are basically a time with less structure. And that's what happened in history. And there's times like that all the time. We just have to find a way to get a foothold in structure again, create a new structure. And then, of course, when things change, adjust your structure. So today's 60-second rant, the infinite reading list. So I wouldn't say that I have an infinite reading list. I maybe have 5 to 10 books that I need to read. I say I need to read because I know I'm not going to have a lot of time in the fall. But I actually don't really feel I have a lot of time now in the summer with all of these things that are getting put into my calendar. Currently, I am reading Lifespan by David Sinclair. Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. Pretty good read if you don't want to age and maybe want to see what's current with the anti-aging science. But that book, of course, has spurred me to look at other books because every book I read, I have to look at the index and citations and, I should probably read that as well. So my list is constantly growing and I'm hoping to have enough time to do that. I basically have to schedule in reading times during my day rather than just keep this thing in my backpack and keep it on my back at all times. Anytime you have a chance to read, you do so. So thank you everybody for joining me on episode number 63. You can subscribe, you can like. I'd appreciate that. If you liked what you heard or didn't, just write a comment. I can have a conversation with somebody. I know these monologues are going to be kind of winded, but very soon, possibly in a few days, I may meet up with someone and we may turn on the webcams and we may make a show that is a little bit different. But glad that I have somebody listening to this that hopefully can pull out something from this. So are we getting out of a dark age? Or are we going into a dark age? How do you want to think about that? Was the pandemic a dark age? I feel it was more structured. So I think of it less as a dark age and more of, something that was like a Roman Empire structure compared to now that things are being, I guess, loosened up as far as in Maine right now, they call it the loosening of the rules or the regulations. How do you feel about that? I think a lot of people are trying to find their way and trying to stay safe. That's kind of the point of everything. Need to survive. That is very, very important. And need to stay educated and always look for new things to learn. I'll see you next week.